You've got to have a really well-architected plan. You're not going to untangle legacy systems in 3 months. That's just not going to happen. You've got to have a long-term view of what needs to be done. You've got to have a vision, and this comes from the CEO, of where you want to go as an organization. And the technology has to be there to support that. The technology shouldn't lead that vision. The technology has to support the vision.
Parnell Woodard, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Rick. How are you?
I'm doing well. Where are you based? I haven't asked. Where are you based?
I'm about an hour north of Boston.
Oh, there you go. Cool. What's the official state town address? Are you? It's still in Massachusetts.
Most people refer to it just as Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And
Oh yeah.
So New Hampshire's got about a 13-mile stretch of coastline there. So we're about 10 minutes from the beach, and it's actually kind of a great little hidden gem in the country. No sales tax, no personal income tax, and the winters really aren't so bad. So I can't complain.
I love it. Yeah, I've got a lot of friends that live in Portsmouth, and it's a cool, funky place, but it is sort of this hidden gem that you don't hear about much. Well, great. So you're on East Coast time as well. Well, listen, I didn't give you much time, a heads up, but before we get started, did you bring a dad joke?
Did
My man, what you got?
Why don't skeletons fight each other?
I think I've heard this, but I don't know. I don't know.
Because they don't have the guts.
Oh man, I have to read mine now. That's how lame I've gotten because there's so many of them in my mind. So, how many narcissists does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Yeah, I don't know.
Just one. The narcissist holds the light bulb while the world revolves around them.
Yeah, indeed.
So dumb.
Indeed.
So dumb. All right. Well, listen. Let's get down to business. So, I had the great pleasure of being a guest on your podcast not long ago. We just ran it on our platform, and essentially that was you asking me questions. But I was really impressed with your background. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I wanted to turn the tables and pick your brain a little bit. And so, before we start, can you give our listeners a little bit of your background so they can understand who they're listening to?
Sure. Well, first, Parnell Woodard, and thanks for having me on, Rick. I've spent really the past 25-ish years first and foremost as an entrepreneur, but I have a great love of technology. I've always had it, really since I was a teenager. I was writing code in giant mainframe machines, that were the size of most people's offices or rooms, and that we've got confined now to our watch, if you will. And my first company was a company in New York City. It was called Emerge. But one of the real tenets of Emerge was the leveraging of technology in the advertising space. Now, this was 2001. The internet was just kind of coming around. A lot of people, when they thought about technology, thought about websites and so on and so forth. But to me, technology has always been broader than just that marketing side of things. Technology enables people to work better together, to think smarter, to be able to produce all of the assets and the material that we see nowadays. So it's always been a big part of who I am and as a person. I was lucky enough to build that company. I had an amazing run with Emerge. I sold that off in 2011. And that's really when I got into the franchising side of things. I was a multi-unit franchisee with Elements Massage here in New England. And even at Elements, we ran on MindBody like you guys do at Alloy. It became clear to me that as an owner, I wanted richer insights and richer analysis of some of the performance of my locations, my clients, all of those things that you want. And I set forth to build a platform that would provide me as an owner a little richer information. Ultimately sold my franchises and started my next company. The company was called Adaptive Analytics, but our product was called IntelliHub. And IntelliHub was really one of the first products that connected to MindBody's actual backend database. MindBody has a great number of partners that connect typically through their API, but we were the first ones to connect to the back end of their database, probably because we were moving about 15 terabytes of data through the pipes every day. But we supported about 120 to 150 franchised organizations around the world, predominantly North America, Europe, a little bit in Australia. And in fact, you guys might have even been, I'd have to go back and look, might have even been on that list. But so I've always been, like I said, really steeped in the technology side of things. And then I ultimately sold that off in 2021 to a competitor to MindBody. And then I stayed on with the buyer for a little bit, and then really started just to work on a really kind of a two-sided approach to working with folks. I work with a lot of companies to help them really make technology work better for the company, to de-risk, unclog, and scale organizations, if you will. Typically in the franchise space, even tighter into health, wellness, beauty, fitness, spa, that kind of space. And then I also work with individuals to help them learn about business ownership. That's kind of my way of giving back, because I think that being a business owner is a really unique thing. So a little bit of my background.
Love it. And I have a passion for that. There's a buddy of mine, he was my Vistage chair when I was in a Vistage group many years ago. And he retired from that, but he teaches a couple of classes at a local college as entrepreneurship major. And I help him with that, co-teach, speak to the groups. It's so much fun. I love it. And I'm glad to hear you do as well. Well, that's awesome. So you have had a lot of experience, really very close to our operations, right? Within Telehub.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have a broader view of just technology in general. We'll go a step deeper, but just to start, what are things that you see currently in the landscape for business? Anything that excites you currently that's coming down the pipe technologically that you think is going to make a difference?
I just published a white paper on that the other day. And in fact, it's called Digital Transformation in Franchising, a 2025 Perspective. So if anybody wants
Fantastic. Yeah, love it.
Share.
Love it. Can we say it one more time just for the
Sure.
listeners?
Digital Transformation in Franchising, a 2025 Perspective. So
awesome. Thank you. Yeah, obviously that's some things that you asked me about, but what are you seeing? Obviously, you wrote the white paper. What was it about, and what are your observations?
There's so many things, right? Because some of it, I think, Rick, revolves around fragmented legacy systems, which is always an animal you have to wrestle with. Sometimes those systems are very difficult to get away from. Sometimes they are so steeped and intertwined in the business operations that unraveling them can become very precarious, and you have to be aware of that. So there's that side of the situation. Obviously, AI and not just ChatGPT, but I think I mentioned this to you on our podcast, Agentic AI, which is really the next iteration of
is that operator is what they're calling it.
Well, that's ChatGPT's tool. That's called.
But just in general, that. Yes, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Agentic AI is really AI that is given the ability to make decisions, to reason more than just create content. So it's typically built into some kind of a workflow, an automated workflow. It could be a series of email outreaches. It could be a series of operational tools. It could be a series of training assets, learning management tools. There's any number of different ways agentic AI is starting to be applied. So, at one end of the spectrum, you got legacy issues. On the other end of this, on the spectrum, you've got this agentic AI. In between all of that, I think there's real issues around leadership and talent gaps in the technology space in that area. There's everything from digital marketing strategies. Consumer expectations are another big part of it. Consumers are getting to the point where they have such a heightened expectation for personalized material, content, interactions, experiences, and you've got to deliver on that. So there's a whole bunch of moving pieces, really in the tech side in the franchise world. So.
Yeah, interesting. You're right, because once you get so embedded and pretty far down the road with any amount of volume in some legacy software, the overwhelming task of moving that or changing it is a huge barrier for most people. But maybe to your point, on the other end of the spectrum, with these AI tools, maybe there's some integration there that makes that a bit smoother. And it's just a necessary evil. Like, you have to do it, right? You can't hold on to your Windows 95 base program, but people do. You hear about that. Certainly in other industries, I hear in, like, say automotive, franchises like an oil change and things like that. They just are Napa. They just don't want to change software. They're still running stuff from 20 years ago because the owner just isn't forward thinking, or maybe doesn't want to mess with it, and it's good enough, right? And they don't want to move. What would you tell that person, or what would you tell someone like me? We're relatively new and nimble, which is great, but what would you tell someone, maybe a franchisor that had been here for a while, that you were consulting and they were like, I don't want to do it, it's too much work, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I think part of that is you've got to have a really well architected plan, a well architected strategy. This is not, you're not going to untangle legacy systems in 3 months. That's just not going to happen. You've got to have a long-term view of what needs to be done. You've got to have a vision, and this comes from the CEO of where you want to go as an organization. And the technology has to be there to support that. The technology shouldn't lead that vision. The technology has to support the vision. But getting back to your question, I think you've got to have a really well architected plan. You're going to need to be able to have some folks in the organization that are going to have to beta test it, right? They're going to have to be some guinea pigs. There's going to be some pain along the way. You need a really sound understanding of the return on investment you're going to get for that, even if it's just the cost saving side of the equation, but also you've got to look at it from the standpoint of being out in front of your competition at the same time. Is there market opportunity that you're missing? Is there market share you're going to lose if you don't make that change? There's so many things that you really have to sit down and work through that. I'm not a big fan of technology for technology's sake. There has to be a clear application, a clear benefit, a clear pain and a gain, if you will, right? That has to occur. I don't know if I answered your question. I mean, I have a whole series of different tools, audits, assessments, frameworks, things like that we work through to identify where there's gaps, where there's holes, where there's pain points, where there's exposure. And it takes a little bit of time to sit down and work through some of that.
So if I'm hearing you right, hire Parnell and he will help you through the process. You're like, I could do that. But, I mean, that's something that we are, I'm somewhat, as a CEO, like you said, it's my job to climb a tree every now and then and make sure we're chopping in the right direction. And I think what's interesting, it's a little bit like upskilling yourself in sports or anything else. Like, say that you've got these different peaks and valleys as you're climbing a mountain, right? It's very rarely linearly from the bottom to the top. You're going to have to go down into a valley to climb the next highest peak. And I was thinking of that illustration as you were talking about this software. It's like, it may take a year and it may be messy and you may have to put other things on hold, and it may feel like you have to take a stroll down in the valley to reach that next peak that you have your eyes on. And you have to be willing to do that, right? That temporary chaos, or even if it's moving backwards a few steps as far as the complexities of the technology until it's all bolted together, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to communicate it clearly to your franchisees, and if there's any friction for them, it's not going to be a popular decision. And to your point, you have to paint the vision. It's a little bit like Henry Ford saying, hey, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? They didn't know they needed an automobile till he made one, but I'm sure somewhere in between the two, it was like, what are you doing? So it felt like regression, if anything. So yeah, really interesting. Is there anything that you see currently that people are putting into play, like a tool or something specific that's being used by regular businesses, right? I'm not tech businesses, and again, not tech for the sake of tech, but things that are being applied right now that are very useful that people can easily adopt right now?
Ooh. Yes and no, in that I always worry about too quick assessment and adoption of any kind of a technology because it tends to be short-sighted from the standpoint of fixing the problem at hand and maybe not the root cause, right? And I want to go back to your analogy there for just a second because I think it's a great one on the athletic side of things, right? If you think about improving your cardio, you get to a point where you improve your cardio, through any number of different exercises, what have you, but you reach a point where you might plateau. And that plateau, you've got to find a way to push through that to be able to improve that, or strength training, cardio, whatever it might be, right? To be able to dial up. And when it comes to technology and implementation, especially in a franchise organization, one of the things people often forget, but is critical, is the lowest common denominator. You have franchisors in your network, or franchisees in your network. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, you have 50. Some of those franchisees are going to be early adopters and they're anxious to try these new things, right? Some of them are going to be very reluctant to, and some of them are very non-tech savvy. So the implementation, the rollout, the training is so critical to adoption and assuring adoption of that, because the folks who are not real comfortable with that technology or new technologies are the ones who are least likely or last to adopt it, right? So that's really, really important to consider as well. In terms of, going back to your question, things that people are adopting, I think there's so many. The AI side of things spans such a broad space now. We see it in B2B, where there are tools now that allow you to create an entire outreach, do an entire body of research on an organization, key decision makers in the organization, identify key salient points that you can bring to them for your organization, and even build out emails, LinkedIn campaigns, and landing pages, Rick, at the push of a button. So that kind of application, think of it on the sales side of the equation, right? The AI side of it as a layer on top of data is just profound. The ability for natural language questions to be thrown into things, to dig into that. More AI in the CRM space, more AI in the consumer experience space, and that side of it. So I think there's a whole bunch of places. The fastest one's AI, but again, AI is so broad across so many different things right now.
I agree. And I think when we look at all of our vendors, I mentioned that on our podcast, you're like, what are you guys implementing? I'm like, well, I think it was more of a security question, but like most of our vendors have that in place. But also all of our vendors have their own AI initiatives, right? Where if you look at our learning management system, or our online manual, they're working on a lot of really creative AI tools around searching, because it's got a 600-page document. They're like, where's the flyer that I give to my kid's soccer team or whatever those things are, right? It's like, okay, let's work on some AI around search. Obviously MindBody, you mentioned those guys, they're working on some AI as well. And so each one of our vendors is working on it sort of in a silo. And I could see eventually having some centralized AI, like again, an operator that could go out and have access to all those platforms to pull together information. I know, on our side, it's that fun time of year when you're republishing your franchise disclosure document or your FDD update, and there's a ton of data. And so for us, I know our COO is heavily involved in that, performing functions like pulling in the franchise disclosure document into an AI tool, showing it the differences, being able to upload a massive spreadsheet with clean data fields, mine that data for different information. It's not quite seamless and perfect yet, but you can see it, right? You can see it just around the corner, where a daunting task of collecting data from multiple platforms for us, from Salesforce, from MindBody, from all of these places, to have a bot, an AI bot, an operator, if you will, a minion, or just to be able to, at least in a clunkiest version right now, is drag and drop things and then ask it the right questions and have the right fields, is very helpful. And we're just on the front edge of that now. But it's really easy to see how, boy, if it just did these few things. And to be honest, Parnell, it might already do that. We may not be the best at using it. As you know, a lot of the magic is in the query itself. Are you asking it the right questions? I tell you, one thing that's been interesting for us is it's helped us give clearer directions. And so you have to be very clear with your directions to an AI tool to get the right data back. But it often makes me think about, I wonder if our directions aren't clear to other humans, right? It's like, this is probably the way we should be describing something to a franchisee or one of our team members, right? Because if we don't get it just right, you don't get what you want back. I'm like, wow, I mean, this could help our entire communication across all of our channels as an organization. So I know it's kind of high level woo-woo stuff at times, but it's just the front edge of what's possible. And it gets me super excited.
Yeah, the other thing I think people need to be a little careful of with AI is, a lot of times people forget that they're putting information into, and I'm just going to use ChatGPT for a second, in that, you might have a franchisee who's anxious to do something with ChatGPT and maybe try and understand a little bit more about maybe a client who's coming in. So they want to do a little research on Rick, who's about to come in. So they might put some information in there, or maybe better yet, they might have somebody they've had a long-term relationship with, and they put a whole bunch of information into ChatGPT to try and learn more about it. Got to remember, unless you're using a paid version of ChatGPT, and I don't know about the other ones in as much detail, you're going to be sharing that information with them publicly. That data is going into their large language model, and you're sharing that. And in some cases, and in some industries, that can be a HIPAA violation. It could be a GDPR violation. There's any number of issues that are there. So sometimes despite the best intention of that franchisee, particularly ones who are on the leading edge, good business practice and clear communications around use cases for AI is important for an organization as well. And a lot of times people just forget that. To go back to your database question, one of the things that I ran into early on when I built IntelliHub was we would sit down and we would be talking with a franchisor, and they would I'm just going to use the word conversion, right? So they would say, well, a conversion is defined as somebody who comes in the door for a training session and they convert into a membership. Okay. Well, if you talk to a franchisee, they might use the same word, but they might have a different definition of how it's calculated. What I learned early on was you have to standardize the definition of the metrics throughout the organization first before you start going into the data to start building calculations and getting that information. Because if you're not all aligned on those definitions, the conversion rate that one franchisee is talking to their fellow franchisee about, now all of a sudden they're like, well, mine was 30% last week, and corporate just made this change, and now mine's at 20%. I don't understand. So just those little things, that have to be aligned in an organization to make sure that the technology does the job you want it to do, I think is often overlooked.
Yeah, I think that's probably part and parcel with what I was trying to communicate, which was it makes you a way better communicator, right? Like, are we using the same terms? Is there any confusion? Because if you don't give it really clear directions and everyone else on the team doesn't understand what those definitions are, to your point, we're speaking different languages about the same subject. It doesn't help at all, right? So yeah, interesting point. Is there anything, Parnell, that you see currently? I know you were close to the fitness space with the amount of work you did with MindBody. Is there anything currently in the fitness space that you see technologically that's coming down the pipe that could be super useful? I know AI, but is there anything specific around AI or anything else?
I think we're going to see wearables take an even bigger leap forward. I think we're going to see wearables, and we're going to see a little bit more hybrid training models where you've got individuals as coaches and AI material or content. The crafting of those, in the fitness space, the crafting of those routines, the crafting of those calendars based on input where a human can interact with AI to allow themselves to scale better and support more clientele. And I think, that both the wearable side of that equation and then the hybrid creation of those routines, if you will, between individuals and AI, I think is going to create some very, very interesting things. The ability to maybe bring that to your the wearables device back into all of those campaigns. I think we're going to see more food, more intake into the wearable side of things as well. It's not real hard to see a couple of years down the road where you could have a pretty good line of sight towards your intake, the exercises you need to do to offset some of that intake. You decide you want to have a bowl of potato chips on Saturday night or something like that. On Monday, it's going to say, hey, here's your 60-minute cardio to burn those bad boys up.
And you go, hey, that's not worth it. It's like, exactly. But yeah, you look at now, people are wearing glucose monitors, and it's like, okay, if you eat this food, it's very specific to you. To your point, people want a personalized experience. So like you silo all this info. You've got a glucose monitor, you've got your step count, you've got your heart rate, you've got your strength, you've got all of these other metrics that are currently measurable, and AI pulling all those together and creating a personalized plan. And I see that for us, we have certain principles that we operate under, but loading those into, say, a paid version that's siloed just for us And then querying that based on our principles could be an easy way for us to leverage that as well. And again, that's just ultimately, to your point, we talked about on your podcast, like bringing down the friction to get from the door to the best possible prescription for that individual. We do it now, but boy, if we could make it easier and more seamless,
Yeah.
yeah, why not? It's just more efficiency, right?
Yeah. 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 I think too, we're going to see a lot more strength on the B2C marketing outreach.
Hmm.
And that's going to be driven by technological capability. I read a really interesting article the other day around CMOs and how kind of the traditional CMO is dead in that, you now have to be a way more of a MarTech expert, marketing technology expert, right? Than the traditional CMO has ever been. You really have to be able to understand that. And I'm seeing more and more folks talk about those leaders, those C-suite leaders, whether they're CTOs, CMOs, COOs, that have to be kind of down in the trenches to really be able to see the day-to-day operations of an organization so that they can better identify tools, processes, technology, what have you, to improve the organization. You can't just sit up here and look down on it. It's just not. It doesn't work that way anymore.
Yeah, I think of just basic examples that we use now, which is, we're going to pump out a corporate newsletter. It's like, great, give me this newsletter, here, this, and you give it a few directions and it spits it out perfect. And you're like, more humor, a couple more emojis, and then copy paste and go, right? It's like,
Yeah,
and then, obviously you save that information. So you go back to it and say, create a similar newsletter, change these data points, also make it more humorous in this area. Boom, done, right? Whatever that may be. It's like, I love it. And as we get these, I'm most excited about the operator bots because then they can do a lot of this stuff automatically,
yeah,
right? Once
yeah.
they get the logins to all your platforms, they can tie it all together and create information with all the data. Well, look, man, it's like one of these topics that's so far reaching and so deep. I feel like we could talk for hours and it would be like we have said a lot and we've said nothing because I mean, with machines creating better versions of machines at exponential growth, it's like, it's hard to say what this thing's going to look like. But I think we can all agree that you can't put your head in the sand, that you have to pay attention. You'd
Yeah.
be crazy not to. And quite honestly, with the speed, you just need to stay aware so that you can take advantage of the opportunities as they arise. If you don't, you're probably going to get run over. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Right. And yeah, there's so many people that are worried about AI taking their jobs and all that kind of stuff. You hear about it and you'll hear people say, well, AI is not going to take your job, but a person who uses AI will take your job. And that is
There you
true.
go. Yep.
But the other thing I think it's going to force us to do is I think it's going to force us to heighten our critical thinking skills.
Mm.
Because we'll get to a point where we can hand off more of that mundane activity to AI. And that's just going to force us to think harder and smarter about what we're doing. So I'm encouraged by it. I think it's going to be a positive thing. And like you said, you better get on that train because if you're not, you're going to get left behind. And that train's moving pretty fast. So.
Well, I mean, talking about newsletters, you think about easy things like for our franchisees to send out their own newsletters to their list, which is just a great, again, it's just that nurturing marketing for the big list that you've paid for at some point. You've got all
Yeah.
these emails and you might know the right avatar and you might know the right message to them. You just don't know when they're ready to make that life change. You just need to stay in front of them consistently. It's so easy to jump on an AI platform and say, hey, write me an article talking about the 5 major benefits of strength training for people over 50 years old. I mean, done in 2 seconds. And you read through it, make sure it's what you want. Yeah, hey, this, but let's mention this, not that. Great. You can tweak it a little bit, copy, paste, done. Right.
Mhm.
So things like that, even at the location level, are so easy right now. And you're crazy not to look at those things. So
Yeah.
again, we could go on forever, but look, I have one final question for you, and then we'll tell folks where to find you. So, gun to your head, Parnell, you're forced to sing karaoke. What's your song and why?
Oh man.
Is that a song? I haven't heard of that one.
No, yeah,
I'm
it,
teasing.
it is. It is funny. There's a story and there's a video somewhere in the world.
Oh, I'm going to find it.
My wife and I and our kids were in Bermuda, and we were staying at a resort. They were doing karaoke, and my wife insisted that the four of us go up and sing. So we opened the book, And she goes, oh, this is a great song. Benny and the Jets from Elton John.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Well, here's the problem with Benny and the Jets. Everybody knows the chorus, right? Benny and the Jet, blah, that, right?
Yep.
Nobody knows the rest of the lyrics, the mohair suit, all those, the whole lines. Nobody knows it. So we are up there singing it. It's being recorded. And I swear to God, the next day, we're on the other side of the island, walking through a shopping area. And there's a woman behind the counter, and she goes, oh my God, the Benny and the Jets family. So we are famous on the island of Bermuda for singing Benny and the Jets. Now, I don't know if I picked that song again, but
I was about to say, would you do that one again?
That's the first one that came to mind. So
look, you've paid your pen. You don't need to do it again. You're already famous. Just be a one-hit wonder and ride off into the sunset.
Yeah.
Well, look, man, I appreciate it. Thanks for sparing the time. Obviously, I can certainly see us staying in contact to take advantage of your services for sure.
Happy to.
But if anyone listening wants to know where to find you, find out more about you, where do they go?
TheFranchiseCTO.com. And the email is parnell@thefranchisecto.com, or hit me up on LinkedIn. Not a lot of Parnells running around, so easy to find.
Awesome. Well, listen, I appreciate your time, sage advice, and thanks for, again, being a guest, and thanks for having me on yours. And I'm sure you'll hear from some of our folks, and you'll definitely be hearing from me. So I appreciate you.
Thanks, sir.
All right. Cheers.